Welcome to Revenge with Lyra.
The roads smelled like gasoline and dust when they pulled my broken body from the wreck. I remember the sirens first, then the cold metal of the stretcher, then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, everything was white, humming, too bright. A nurse leaned over me and whispered, "Sweetheart, stay awake. We need your family to sign consent for the procedures." My hands trembled. I was 16, old enough to feel pain, too young to sign for my own survival. "They're calling your parents now," she said. "Just hold on." "Hi, everyone, my name is Riley Monroe, I'm 30. And if you think trauma fades with time, it doesn't. It just learns to live quieter." Back then, I lay on that hospital bed listening to doctors whisper words like internal bleeding, ruptured spleen, time-sensitive. I waited for footsteps that never came. The nurse returned 30 minutes later with an expression no child should ever see. "They refused," she said softly.
"What?"
"Your father said, let me know if she doesn't survive. I don't have time for paperwork." The world tilted, but not from the injury, from the betrayal. My mother didn't call. My brother didn't show. Their silence signed louder than ink ever could. The hospital tried again.
And again.
No answer. Finally, an older surgeon said, "Contact the grandfather."
They did.
He answered on the first ring. 15 minutes later, he was running through the double doors, white hair wild, voice shaking with fury. "Where is she?" "What did they say?" "Move aside." He signed every form with a trembling hand. He held my arm while they prepped me for surgery. He whispered, "You're not alone, Riley. Not anymore." I survived. But the part of me that believed in family didn't. 15 days later, when a man in a suit knocked on my mother's door and heard what she had done, he didn't just react. He exploded. 15 days after the accident, I was home from the hospital, stitched, bruised, walking slow, but alive. My mother barely looked at me. My father didn't speak to me at all. They acted like nothing had happened, like I hadn't almost died because they couldn't be bothered to drive 10 minutes or sign their names. That afternoon, the doorbell rang, sharp, confident, official. Mom opened it. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood on the porch, briefcase in one hand, badge clipped to the other. His voice boomed through the hallway. "I'm looking for the parents of Riley Monroe." My mother froze. "Yes, that's me." He stepped inside without waiting. His eyes scanned the room, then narrowed. "You must be the father." Dad nodded stiffly. The man dropped a folder onto the coffee table with a loud thud. "Do either of you understand," he said, voice dangerously calm, "that refusing medical consent for a minor in a life-threatening situation is classified as neglect under state law?" Mom blinked. Dad scoffed. "She survived, didn't she?" The man's jaw tightened. "She survived because her grandfather signed within minutes." "You two didn't even answer the phone." Silence. Not guilty silence. Arrogant silence. The kind that dares anyone to challenge it. He turned to me. "Riley, I visited the hospital. You were conscious during part of the intake. You confirmed your parents refused consent." I nodded slowly. "Yes." My mother hissed, "Why would you say that?" The man opened the folder and slid out several documents. Hospital recordings, call logs, doctor statements, all showing consistent refusal from the legal guardians. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand trembled. Then the man said something that sliced the room open. "Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, this isn't just about paperwork, it's about intent. We need to determine whether your refusal was neglect or something far worse." My mother's voice cracked. Worse? What do you mean worse?" He opened another file. This one had photos.
Notes.
A signature I recognized instantly. Grandpa's. The man in the suit placed the second file gently on the table, the way someone sets down a bomb. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother's fingers tightened around her robe. Grandpa's signature sat at the bottom of every single page. Each document was dated. Each note detailed. Each line written by a man who refused to let me vanish quietly. The investigator tapped the file. "These," he said, "are statements your father provided voluntarily." He contacted us the morning after Riley's accident. Mom swallowed hard. Why would he do that? The investigator looked at her like she'd asked why water is wet. Because he believed his granddaughter was in danger. Dad finally snapped. This is ridiculous. Families argue. Kids exaggerate. The investigator cut him off. She was unconscious, bleeding internally, and needed emergency surgery. You were contacted 4 times. You responded once and said, quote, "Let me know if she doesn't survive. I don't have time for paperwork." The words echoed through the living room like an obituary for the parent-child relationship I once hoped we had. My mother turned to me sharply. "You told them what he said? You told them that?" I stared at her. "You said nothing." The investigator cleared his throat and continued. "We don't take accusations lightly. But your father's report included additional information." He opened another page. A pattern of withholding care, ignoring medical needs, and prior incidents involving verbal neglect. Mom paled. Dad clenched his jaw. Then came the sentence that made my heart stop. Based on the evidence, a petition was filed for temporary guardianship, naming Robert Monroe, Riley's grandfather, as the recommended custodian. My mother shot up from the couch. "Custodian? What are you talking about? She lives here." "Legally," the investigator said. "That may change." My father stood too, voice rising. "You can't take our daughter." "Your daughter?" I whispered quietly. The investigator turned toward me. "Riley, you're allowed to speak." I looked at my parents, 2 strangers in familiar skin. And for the first time, I did. My voice felt small at first, like a match flickering in a storm, but the investigator waited, steady and patient. "Go on, Riley," he said softly. And something inside me finally snapped into place. I took a breath. "My parents didn't refuse because they were busy," I said, staring straight at them. "They refused because they didn't care." My mother flinched like I'd thrown something. "That's not true. We were overwhelmed, You were watching TV?" I said. "I heard the nurse tell the doctors." Dad crossed his arms. "We didn't know how serious it was." "You didn't ask." My voice cracked. "You didn't even come to the hospital?" The investigator nodded grimly. Riley's statements matched the reports. Mom's breathing turned frantic. Fast. We're her parents. Mistakes happen. This is our home. We provide, You provide? I laughed, a hollow, painful sound. Grandpa bought my school books. Grandpa paid my camp fees. Grandpa took me to every doctor's appointment. You two just existed. Dad slammed his hand on the coffee table. "You ungrateful." The investigator stepped between us.
"Sir."
"Sit down." The room felt thin, like the walls were listening. Outside, a dog barked. A car drove by. The world kept turning even though mine was splitting in half again. The investigator turned to me. "Riley, one of the questions we must address is whether you feel unsafe in this home." My mother reached for my arm. "Sweetheart, don't do this. We love you." I stepped away. Love doesn't sound like abandonment. Love doesn't look like paperwork refused. Love doesn't choose convenience over a child's life. "I don't feel safe here," I said. "Not physically. Not emotionally. Not personally." Dad's face twisted in shock. "After everything we've done for you?" "What have you done?" I whispered. "Name one thing." The investigator closed his folder. That's all I needed to hear. In that moment, something cold and final settled into the space between us, the kind of truth that doesn't heal, it divides. And the investigator's next words tore the last thread holding us together. "I'll be filing the emergency transfer request today." My mother collapsed back onto the couch as if the investigator's words had physically struck her. "Emergency transfer?" she repeated, voice trembling. "You can't just take a child away from her parents." The investigator didn't flinch. "Mrs. Monroe, the law allows emergency guardianship when a minor's life was endangered by the legal guardian's neglect. In this case," he looked at me gently, "the evidence is overwhelming." Dad paced the room like a caged animal. "This is ridiculous. We're her parents. She belongs here." Something inside me cracked. Not pain, not fear.
Truth.
Clean, sharp, unstoppable. I nearly died, I said quietly. You prioritize convenience over my life. Mom's face twisted. We didn't know it was that serious. You didn't ask, I repeated. You didn't pick up. You didn't come. You didn't even sign. The investigator cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, you refused consent for a time-sensitive procedure. Had her grandfather not arrived in time, we would be discussing a funeral, not guardianship. Dad pointed at me like I was the problem. She's turning everyone against us. The investigator lifted a brow. She didn't create the evidence. She survived it. Just then, a knock echoed sharply through the house. My mother jolted. My father froze. The investigator opened the door. Grandpa stood there. His eyes were tired but blazing with controlled rage. He walked past my parents without acknowledgement and came straight to me. You ready, kiddo? He asked softly. I nodded. Mom sprang up. You can't take her. She lives here. This is her home. Grandpa turned to her, voice steady as stone.
No.
This is where she sleeps. Home is where someone chooses her. Dad's voice cracked with desperation. You can't just. Grandpa reached into his coat and held up a stamped document. Court order. Effective immediately. My mother let out a sound I'd never heard, half rage, half disbelief. My father sat down hard, like gravity had grown heavier. The investigator looked at me. Gather what you need. You won't be coming back tonight. I walked to my room slowly, each step peeling away another layer of fear. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't leaving a house. I was escaping it. I closed my bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, breathing in the silence, a silence that suddenly felt different. Not afraid, not tense, just ending. I looked around at the room I'd grown up in. The faded posters, the chipped dresser, the bed with the uneven leg, a childhood built on crumbs of affection, and a mountain of pretending. I grabbed a small duffel bag. I didn't own much. My parents never spent money on me unless someone was watching. I packed slowly. A few shirts, jeans, my sketchbook, the necklace Grandpa gave me when I turned 11. When I stepped back into the hallway, I heard my parents arguing with the investigator. Mom's voice was shrill. She's manipulating you. She's dramatic. She always wants attention. Grandpa's voice cut through like a blade. She wanted survival. You chose inconvenience. The investigator motioned me forward. You ready? As we walked toward the door, my father stood in our path. You'll regret this, he said, eyes cold. You think life is easy out there? You think your grandfather can protect you forever? I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I felt nothing. No fear. No craving for approval. Just clarity. You already taught me life isn't easy, I said softly. You just forgot to teach me love. He stepped aside, jaw tight. Mom reached for me desperately. Riley, please don't do this. We're your parents. I walked past her. Parents show up, I whispered. You didn't. When the front door opened, the late afternoon sun spilled across the floor, warm, golden, real. It felt like the first true light I'd seen in years. Outside, Grandpa placed a gentle hand on my back. Come on, kiddo. You're safe now. As I walked down the steps with my small bag, the investigator behind me, I didn't look back. Not once. Because some homes aren't homes. Some are just places you learn to outgrow. Grandpa's truck smelled like old leather and peppermint, the scent of every safe place I'd ever known. As we pulled away from the house, I watched my parents through the window. Mom stood shaking, one hand over her mouth. Dad stared at the ground like he'd misplaced something valuable. Neither of them stepped onto the porch. Neither of them called my name. Not once. The investigator followed us in his car until we reached Grandpa's neighborhood. Quiet streets, trimmed hedges, the kind of place where people waved at strangers. The opposite of everything I had known. Inside Grandpa's home, the lights were warm, the floor creaked, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon. He set my duffel bag down. This, he said gently, Is your room now? My throat tightened. The room wasn't fancy, just a soft bed, a worn rug, and a window overlooking the trees. But it felt like something I'd never had before mine. We sat at the small kitchen table with 2 mugs of cocoa. Grandpa cleared his throat. I should have taken you sooner, he said. I saw signs. I didn't push hard enough. You saved my life, I whispered. I did what any real family should do. Later that night, while I unpacked, Grandpa knocked softly. There's something you need to know, he said. The investigator, he wasn't just following protocol. He was following evidence. He handed me another envelope, thick, official, heavy. Inside were reports I'd never seen. Notes from teachers who'd reported concerns, a pediatrician's letter about missed appointments, financial records showing how often my parents refused essential expenses, 3 previous welfare checks my parents had lied about. I stared at the papers, numb. They knew, I whispered. People knew. They tried, Grandpa said softly. Your parents blocked everything. He paused, looked at me with eyes full of truth and sorrow. The man in the suit, he didn't just come for what happened at the hospital. My heart pounded. He came because your parents were already under investigation. And tomorrow, he said, I would learn why. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the room like a quiet reminder. You're safe. But my chest still felt tight as Grandpa called me into the living room. The investigator was already there, seated on the couch with a folder on his lap, the thick one I hadn't opened yet. He cleared his throat. Riley, before we close the guardianship hearing, you deserve the full truth. Grandpa sat beside me, steady and warm like a wall protecting me from every memory that still hurt. The investigator opened the folder. There were 3 welfare reports before your accident, he said. All dismissed because your parents were cooperative during visits. But the hospital incident changed everything. I swallowed. What was in the reports? He handed me a document. I scanned line after line. Missed medical appointments. Untreated injuries. Lack of supervision. Emotional neglect. Deliberate withholding of necessities. My fingers trembled. This was me? He nodded gently. You minimized a lot, Riley. Kids often do. He handed me another page, the final trigger for the investigation. A quote from my father, said during a recorded welfare check weeks before the accident. If she wants things, she should earn them. We're not raising a charity case. My breath hitched. I remembered that night. I remembered the hunger, the cold, the silence. Grandpa's hand closed around mine. They forgot children aren't property, he whispered. The investigator continued. When you almost died, we revisited every file. The pattern was undeniable. What happened in that hospital wasn't a mistake. It was consistent behavior. I looked at both of them, tears burning. So, what happens now? He closed the folder. Your parents waived their right to contest guardianship. You remain with your grandfather until adulthood. They will have supervised visitation only if you choose. Choose. A word I'd never been given before. I wiped my face and whispered, I choose peace. Grandpa exhaled, relief breaking across his features. You have it now, he said. For good. As the investigator left, the house felt warm. Not from the sun, but from something deeper. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't an accident. I wasn't a forgotten signature. I was free.